And Friday has come much faster than I thought it was going to come this week, Tim. I don't know about you, but my goodness.
Yes, it is amazing. This has been a very eventful week. The weather is getting people a little more optimistic, and as they're optimistic, they're starting to reach out and explore the world like they haven't in the last 3 years.
I'm finding that when these weeks go by so fast, it's like I'm getting older faster, and I don't like that. So we gotta fix this. Maybe we just have to slow things down a little.
It's funny because if you think about it, time itself is finite. We cannot control how much time exists or how time works. What we can do is, like you said, change our perceptions around time. And
Yes.
that we have total control over.
So this wasn't an intended lead into our conversation today. I just found that having come out of a series of meetings, however, I bet we can work it into our discussion. We're going to finish, and my understanding is we decided we're going to finish the last 4 of the 12 principles, and those being quality, complexity, risk, and change. Have I got those right?
Yes, you certainly did.
All
And
right.
it was interesting to me. This was unplanned, but I was looking at this week. These are things that are common, not just to projects and project management, to business itself.
To life.
Business usually has a very specific approach to all 4 of these topics.
Yeah. I literally fired my plumber today this week that I have used for years because the quality aspect suddenly started to fall off. Mm-hmm. And I have a new plumber in the wing. I mean, it's just, you're right. It goes across everything, across every domain there is.
Yeah.
But usually we start off our podcast with a little bit of experience. And I was really thinking about this. If we're going to talk about quality, complexity, risk, and change, I know that when I was a young project manager, these things scared me. But as I matured in my managing of projects, what I found was that these things became part of who I was. And so I didn't need the new version of the PMBOK to tell me I should be doing things this way. I somehow intuitively gained this knowledge. And I think it was because I got slapped upside the head a few times by customers that said, your quality is wrong. Your quality is poor in this situation. You need to understand we are much more complex than you suggest that we are. And by the way, have you considered these risks? And I need these things changed. So after a while, you have to learn how to deal with that.
Yeah, and it's funny because I was the same way, where these things are dark mysteries. They're sort of like the magic smoke of business and project management, and how do I do them? The mechanics are fairly easy. However, the implementation, again, will take a lifetime to really master, I've found.
It does. And I tell you, I was just on a call a little while ago where we're trying to sort out a few issues on a project. And it's amazing what happened after the call. I started getting calls from participants individually. And I think it's because they understood that I understand. And so, yeah, I think you're right. It comes with the maturity. But if I'm looking at these four last principles, and I understand that all 12 of them kind of intertwine. But if I'm looking at these 4, have you seen any commonalities amongst the 4?
I was thinking about that. We were talking just before the show started recording, and they're all part of business, not just part of project management, but something else about these really struck me. Each one of these may be valuable for their specific contributions, but you can actually use each one of these to communicate the value of project management itself. Specifically, if you go into the 6th edition of the PMBOK and look at quality management and risk management, they say right there, communication and visibility of quality and risk are one of the highlights of how we manage things. It's not just doing the work, but making sure people know what they're getting for the investment in setting aside someone like us.
Oh, that's exactly right. In fact, I looked at it even slightly differently. And I looked at, for example, if you look at quality, that's really what you really are, is you're satisfying your stakeholders or your end users' expectations, right? Their implied needs, their stated needs, whatever. So that deals with your end user. If you look at complexity, the whole idea isn't so much that things are complex, it's the fact that we as project managers have to be able to navigate that complexity. And a lot of that comes from what? Relationships with people, with humans, with our stakeholders. See, you're probably seeing a theme here that, I was looking at.
Certainly, certainly.
But risk talks about the fact that you are responding to risk events. It's not so much that you are understanding that there is risk, because there is, but you're responding to risk events, again, by employing the humans within that risk process. And then change isn't so much, we as project managers think of changes and changes to our software or changes to our system. I'm thinking of change as more of enabling change into the organization so that they can accept the system. So to me, the commonality is the people. It's my end user I'm trying to satisfy.
Yes, each one of those speak to the needs and expectations of the people who are going to eventually own the deliverable.
Yeah. So in terms of change, and I tell you, even in all of my years of project management, it wasn't until probably the last maybe last 5 years, that the whole idea of organizational change management really took life. And I think that's the change that the PMBOK 12th principle is looking at.
Yes.
Do you think?
Yes, I do. It's really funny because I was just hitting my stride in consulting with my big, $1 to $20 million projects, big for you, right? But I was talking to CXOs, I was influencing the direction of corporations, and organizational project management became a discussion topic inside of Project Management Institute. And this said, change is not just change to meet what the stakeholders are telling you to do, but understanding the weather, understanding what's happening outside of the project and being able to navigate just like a captain on an ocean.
Yeah, I was thinking back to one of my early project management experiences where, and this goes back a ways, you're going to laugh at this, Tim, but we were taking an organization from filling out paper-based applications, sending them off to Key Punch to key in the coding to put into a system, which basically all it did was calculate and produce checks. That's basically all it did.
Right.
And what we were doing with this new system was we were integrating all of those functions into a computer system such that they didn't have to do hand calculations anymore. The system did this for them. They were able to input, and they were also able to retrieve history and all that sort of thing. Where we failed was we didn't pay attention to preparing the organization for change. When I say we failed, the project was a huge success, but where we failed certain individuals was some of the older people who loved their paper decided that rather than adapt to the new system, they retired. Mm-hmm. And so we missed an opportunity. We lost a lot of institutional knowledge, and we missed that opportunity because we didn't offer this change management aspect to their careers.
Yeah. Oh boy, I can cite so many examples of this. And when we get to change, I have a story that I think you'll enjoy. Let's actually go through each one of these individually and start looking at these.
You've got me curious. Do you want to start with change?
Yeah, let's do.
You got me curious as to your story.
Oh boy. So I was being used by corporate public affairs for about 3 years as an advisor to the community. Public affairs for the corporation, this was a multi-billion-dollar year corporation, was basically the arm of the corporation that said, we want to communicate and educate the world about our value. And so I was doing a lot of local advising, and I was pulled into state and county projects. And one of them was electronic management of evidence in court systems. Now, you think that paychecks, think about creating a chain of evidence with electronic files. I was just working with local people who were not at the federal level, and these people were very aware of how their jobs and their lives and their profession was going to be impacted over the next 20 years. Because all of a sudden, in court, you have a piece of paper, and you can actually physically track its change of evidence. Now, how do you do that when it's electronic? And we had incredible conversations. If you're ready to be open and understanding and listen to your stakeholders, you can actually get into some really interesting discussions.
I didn't realize that I was talking to a real life CSI guy.
Well, you will actually be surprised. I'm very unique in the opportunities I was given, and as we explore this, I'll share some other stories with you that will frighten you with my breadth. But
yeah, my story around change was very much what I already recounted in terms of taking people from the paper-based system to the electronic system. Now, back then, it was literally from punch cards to green screen.
Right.
And some of the people who are listening to us right now are going, "What's a green screen?" Right. So it was the early days of computing. But those, in terms of organizational change, that was a real challenge that we didn't always rise up to. Now I think we're much better at it as an industry, and certainly as project managers.
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
No, I was going to switch slightly. So finish that thought, and then I'll go on to that.
So change, actually, when we look at change, that's what the new PMBOK focuses on. Prepare those impacted for the adoption and sustainment of new and different behaviors.
Yeah.
And it's basically, we're talking about, continuity and disruption. And we are the bastions of minimizing continuity and disruption through that change.
So here's a thought I had, because a lot of the new PMI standards and guidelines can address both the old what we call the old predictive or waterfall methods, the newer agile methods, and also hybrid methods, that sort of thing. But if I were to look at agile under either of these, let's say between if I were to look at change under both the predictive and the agile life cycle, do you see any substantial differences between those two approaches?
Well, let's talk about commonalities first.
Sure.
It's going to have to be formal. It's going to have to be communicated, and you need some permanent record to go back, because you need configuration management, basically version control, if you're going to do change properly. Now, that doesn't matter. What matters is the method in which change is discovered, discussed, agreed upon, implemented, and managed. Because the only real difference is, in predictive, you have a goal in mind. You know exactly what you want. And in Agile, you don't know. So Agile doesn't have this formal map that you follow. It has a formal map that's built in to the way you communicate, you discuss. You have those Agile ceremonies like stand-ups and reviews and retrospectives that are constantly churning things up and looking for these things that are saying, number one, we have something going on here and we need to pay attention. Number two, we have an innovation and we need to pay attention. And so it's a constant thing. So I like to describe it as, in predictive projects, change is a system that is part of the project management framework. And in Agile, this formal change is integrated into the very way the team does the work.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because in predictive, you almost have to have your vision way ahead of time. And I've worked on some projects that you start and it's 4 years before you implement. So that vision has to be pretty visionary, shall we say. But it has to be, and then if there's any kind of change that happens in the meantime, it can upset the entire schedule and everything else. Whereas I think what you're saying in Agile, because you've got your end users as part of the sprints, they're testing the system out as it moves along. I think you're able to much more easily implement the organizational change processes within the system as you talk to the users who are sitting there right by your side.
So I have a quick question for you. I've been on 3-year projects and 5-year projects. And yeah, how do you forecast a predictive outcome with that model? We used phase gates, and we used milestones that say, we're going to stop here and we're going to really take 2 or 3 weeks and think of, is this really the direction we want to go? What did your governance look like?
Well, we did the same thing. From a governance perspective, we used phased gates as well. Now, however, we talked about quality before, meaning to meet your intended or perhaps unstated or implied needs of your stakeholder. So to us, also the usability or the experience of using that system was probably paramount. So phase gates helped us with our schedules and our processes and all that. But what we did was we would develop wireframes, or we would develop some sort of early adoptive, let's say it was some sort of example of what the system would look like well in advance of actually starting out onto the requirements, almost like a proof of concept.
Yeah.
And so once we developed that proof of concept and everyone had that vision in their minds, it was much easier to move forward towards that 3 or 4 year end goal. Yeah,
that's the same concept as a prototype in Agile, or prototyping.
Oh, good.
Very good. Okay, let's move on here. Let's go on to risk just for fun. We'll go backwards today. What about risk?
Here's what I'm finding with a lot of my end users who are end user organizations who are trying to set up their own project management offices or project management structures, and I'll get pulled in to help them. A lot of folks, when they talk about risk, they don't want to document risk as in a potential event that could happen. They want to document the risk as it happens, when it's an actual event. So I might say a risk is that I haven't estimated, I'm just making something up now, that I haven't estimated the user stories for my final sprint in a fixed price project. Let's say I haven't estimated them accurately. That's a risk. I might have underestimated. Well, I'll have projects that don't want to document that risk simply because it hasn't happened yet. And then when it happens, they go, oh, let's document this as a risk. Well, no, it's too late.
It's an issue.
It's an issue.
That's right.
Yeah. So I'm finding that, and again, their guidelines are very, I think in PMBOK are very, very structured, very well done. In reality, people don't think of risks as in something that's potential. They think it's something that has to have happened.
But that's what we do in business and in our personal lives too. We'll worry about that when it gets here, because we have some things on our plate right now. But the problem is, the risk in the future may be so much more impactful than what we're dealing with now. And we need to prioritize not just our risks against each other, but our risks against our ongoing issues. When I started in 1991 or 1992, my supervisor said, Tim, lay out your schedule, and then we'll add 10% to the end of the schedule as buffer. I said, great. And I was thinking he was a wizard, right? He a lot of forethought. And when I went into my project management classes, all of a sudden I realized, yeah, that's probably better than a lot of people do. But at the same point, there's a much better way to do it, which is what you're talking about, the quantification of responses for duration and cost. And we call that reserve analysis.
Yeah, you reminded me that a lot of the work I did was in bidding on fixed price projects, very large projects. Sometimes the bid itself would take us 3 or 4 months to produce. Mm-hmm. And there was always this tension between the person who wanted to make the sale and the people who were working in the bid who would have to deliver it.
Right.
And so the people who would want to make the sale, they would want to squeeze that schedule, because if they squeezed the schedule, they got paid faster, and it seemed like the cost would not be as great. Whereas those of us who are going to have to deliver what we were writing about knew more than the salespeople. We wanted to extend the schedule because we didn't want to work 45 hours a day as opposed to a week.
It took us 2 years to bridge that gap. The sales force owns the relationship with the client. Yeah. And we and our experts have to go in and create not just an expectation, but a warm relationship where our sales understands and trusts us to have these knowledgeable discussions. This is a hard thing to overcome in consulting.
But if I look at the way the Project Management Institute describes risk, even under the latest edition of its body of knowledge, I'm fully aligned with the way they present it. I mean, you have to maintain your logs. You have to assign an accountable person or a responsible person, even if they're not the one that's doing the work. They still have to take that responsibility for making sure the risk is mitigated or addressed somehow, even if it's not a mitigation strategy. You have to be able to look at those risks every week, periodically, so that you're always top of mind, and that you can watch, is something getting more risky, or something becoming less of a risk and can therefore be closed. So all of that discipline that the PMBOK talks about, I fully align with.
Yes, and there's something else that was really neat. This actually occurred with the publishing of the 6th edition. They came up with a second report. Okay, they have a project document called a risk register, and that's where you manage and you prioritize and you organize. That's your analysis document for risk, right? Then the risk report they introduced as a communication tool, which talks about general project risk, like the project expected monetary value, right? And this gives you basically a benchmark for all of your individual risks that you can say, for this project, is this risk out of hand? And not only that, it helps you with the analysis, but it helps you communicate it too, which is, again, this is something that we have to get used to. It's that transparency of not just opportunities, but also threats.
Oh, absolutely. If I can present a practical example, I was working on a large project, and we had the entire schedule ahead of us. We had several of the subject matter experts from the user community participating with the system integrator in developing the requirements definition. And I was looking at the schedule, and I saw that, and this was a waterfall strategy, and I saw that there was a design period and a development period and a system test period, and then the user acceptance test period. And as I was looking out, I realized that this client organization was not ready at all for user acceptance test. So I went to the chief deputy of the whole department, and I said, you guys aren't going to be ready for user acceptance tests. And she told me, she goes, yeah, but that's a year away. And I said, but what's your plan to get there when that year comes? Well, we'll just bring a bunch of people in from the field offices, and we'll just have them bang away at the computer screens. And if they find a defect, they'll tell you. If they don't find a defect, they won't.
Yeah, let's just crash the project. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I said, here, how about I do this? And so, of course, I wrote a risk because they weren't ready. And I said, if you will allow me to mitigate the risk, give me 20 of your brightest and best today. And I will work with them and we'll develop a series of user test scripts based on permutations and combinations of what kinds of events can happen. We'll probably end up with 5,000 or 6,000 test cases. And she goes, 5,000 or 6,000? No way. Well, guess what? We ended up with 6,000 test cases. And the day that system integration testing was completed and it was turned over to us for testing, we had 20 people ready to go and who knew that system backwards, forwards, inside out.
Wow. And again, with these huge monolithic systems, you need that formal documented approach or it's going to crash and burn.
But can you imagine had I written that risk at the time that we were about to go into user acceptance test?
Oops, it's no longer a risk. It's an issue.
It's an issue. That's right.
Yeah.
No, I like the way they drove it. How about why don't we look at quality? Because I want to save complexity for last.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, let me. Quality has always been interesting to me because quality sort of grew up with project management. You have the ISO 9000 standards and the ISO 10,000 standards. You have Six Sigma. At the same time that you're actually producing projects and project management. So there's always been this expectation of quality as just part of the way we do our work. Now, my question to you is this a common discussion that your stakeholders have, or do you spend a little time educating your stakeholders on each project?
No, this actually, in the last several years, this has become a very prominent discussion with my stakeholders. They expect it. Now, years ago, I can tell you, quality was one of those things we as project managers did not like imposed upon us because it seemed like, and I'll use this phrase that I've heard several times, they wanted to inspect quality into the system when we were so far down the road. And so to us, it was an expensive intrusion because it wasn't done properly.
Right. I remember in 92 or 93, I was in industrial engineering in a transportation company, IT, right? They had just adopted IT as its own organization, and I was hired to help them, coming in as just basically a support person, right? And overnight, all of a sudden you have posters all over. And one of the posters caught my eye. It said, quality is built into the plan. It's not bolted on to the outside as a series of inspections. And I didn't understand that until I started studying quality in college.
Yeah, if you plan for it up front and have people who are very well versed in understanding what quality is, then you can do those periodic reviews, deliverable reviews, product reviews, and catch the defects and catch the issues before they become sort of cast in concrete as part of your system.
And one of the conversations that I enjoy having with project managers who have not been formally introduced to quality is I ask them, how do you build quality into your plan? What are the quality activities that you perform? And maybe we can explore this on another show because I think we could actually expand on this quite a bit.
Yeah, I agree. And I come from an organization where we used to bring in quality managers from other projects who had nothing to do with our project. And so that was, an independent review of our own internal projects.
Right.
But
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we have a few minutes left. Do you want to go to complexity now, or do you want to?
Let's talk about complexity. That one actually was the mysterious one of the four principles that we were looking at. And I actually enjoyed looking at this. Going into this material, what did you think they were going to talk about with complexity?
Well, I guess before I read it, my thought process was, yeah, we're IT specialists. That's what we do. We build complex systems. We make things easy for our end user, even if it costs us time and effort to build that complexity into the system to make it easy for them. That's kind of what my going in thought was.
Yeah, and part of it was risk. Whenever I think about complexity, I think about risk. Automatically, my head goes to risk. I really like the definition of complexity. It's the result of human behavior, system interactions, that's your integration, uncertainty, that's your risk, and ambiguity, that's the X factor, that's the I don't know. And it's a combination or an integration of all four of those that the PMBOK calls complexity. And I'm really interested in seeing what experts take this vision and where they run with it.
Well, and I think that when I read the PMBOK, and when I looked at this, what I really liked was the fact that in my assumption that it was all about complexity within the system itself, I never thought of, but now it makes sense, that uncertainty and ambiguity, even though we live with those every day on every project in our lives, but they do add to that complexity. I mean, those things that we live with really add to the complexity that we have to deal with on our projects.
Yeah, are the unidentified risks, the unknown unknowns. The other thing that fascinated me was result of human behavior.
Well,
again, the human factor, the human element.
In my mind, that is the most complex aspect of any project I have ever worked on.
I've been spending years studying and trying to understand human behavior, so I had a much more mature approach to being ready for people being weird and being human beings. Again, you know, it's what we say after we've been doing projects for a couple of years. If it wasn't for people, projects would be easy, right?
Yeah. Well, and the surprising thing is, you know, a lot of times you think, well, the vendor-client relationship naturally creates a tension, which naturally creates behavioral issues. But what I find is, in my situation, I often made great friends and great relationships, I should say, with my client organization, and the complexity or the human behavior issues came from within my own team.
You know, I hate to quote Marcus Aurelius, but the obstacle stops being in the way and it starts being the way to the solution.
Yeah.
And it's frightening. And this pattern comes up over and over again when we see these things that are complex. If we take our time, take a breath, don't panic, and review and analyze, they won't just help us understand them, but they'll help us understand what the best solution to that part of the work is. It's absolutely brilliant. And understanding this I don't know factor became such a driving need for me in the last 3 years.
So, you know, last week we talked about one of the principles we talked about was systems thinking. And my thinking is that systems thinking and complexity kind of go hand in hand. Because if you have a systems thinking approach to the problem, it reduces the complexity of that problem.
Let me blow your mind.
All right.
Think about systems thinking as configuration management, right?
Okay.
It's your process. It's your tests and inspection. Think about complexity as change. You notice how configuration management and change management work together to actually contribute success in each other. Systems thinking and complexity do the same.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That actually does make a lot of sense. Tim, you have just opened my mind. You have blown my mind.
You get to share that with 10,000 more people now.
There you go. Yeah, that's true. I had somebody asked me one time, they go, well, how do you as a project manager deal with, like, how do you, what's your behavior when it comes to complexity? And my answer was, I try to handle whatever gets thrown at me. And as a project manager, you get the kitchen sink thrown at you.
It's being comfortable with the unknown. And I found stories and analogies to prepare people. That's the secret. Preparing not just yourself for this, but preparing everybody within an environment to be ready for this. For instance, in Agile, I don't talk about, we're going to have confusion and chaos at the bunch of it. I say this Agile project is like a picture puzzle. Now, it's going to be boring and confusing because we're going to have to dump all those puzzle pieces out on the table, and we're going to have to sort them and organize them in colors and shapes. And this is going to take a little time, but if we do this right, it's going to make the rest of putting the puzzle together real easy. And using these preparation tools and skills like this, there's another one that I'll talk about later when we get into complex systems, because we're going to be touching again in other shows that also is this usable. We deal with complexity all the time. Humans and groups are hardwired to deal with the unknown and be ready for anything.
By the way, that analogy you used about the puzzle pieces, I was thrown a project one time. I got brought in after 2 project managers before me were removed from the project. I'm thinking, why am I doing this? But the puzzle pieces have you ever seen a puzzle that's printed on one side and the exact same picture is printed on the other side, but at a 45 or at a 90-degree angle?
No.
That's the project I got, the puzzle pieces I got as to which, but you end up being to the point where you have to solve the problem. And I liked what you said. I don't even know if you realize what you said. It's being comfortable with the unknown.
Yes.
And so you look at every one of the worst ones I had was changing CEOs midstream. And those 2 CEOs were diametrically opposed in their approach to what was best for the end user organization.
Yes.
So what do you do with that? You calmly, comfortably talk to this incoming CEO, talk about where you've been, talk about what they need, and then you make the shifts. You provide the data that they need and go from there. But you don't have to sit there and create all sorts of discomfort and anxiety for yourself or for your team.
Exactly. Personal awareness and emotional intelligence. We think of them as leadership skills.
Yeah.
No. They are skills across everything. They're skills in quality, skills in complexity, skills in risk, skills in change, all the other principles and domains. These are primary tools, and we don't just need these. We need to communicate the value and train both our teams and our stakeholders. This is the point in my classroom when I jump up in my chair and I start getting really passionate about the material, because this is where it starts. It's that comfortable and realizing that the world's not orderly, because humans are not orderly and nature is not orderly. Understanding this and understanding that this is human nature and this is the world we know, it may not be comfortable. And yeah, we're going to feel pain and we're going to be scared, but this is natural. And this is the way humans are.
And in my experience, I was able to be fairly comfortable with almost anything that was thrown at me in dealing with, for example, the change in the CEOs, or perhaps there was a technology innovation which we could bring into the project and make it go faster and go better. Or perhaps there were new requirements thrown at us in the middle of a requirements definition process, which changed the way we were heading. So I became comfortable with all of that. Where I had to truly mature as a project manager was that complexity that was added by humans, by infighting, by egos, by the sorts of things that you deal with at the human level, at the team level on a project. I had a situation where our team liked to work past 5 or 6 o'clock. Our client was unionized. Everyone went home at 4 o'clock. We had to adjust everything. I mean, it was, those kinds of human factors that just make people grumble and make things a little more difficult, that add complexity to the system you're working on or to the project you're working on.
Yeah, politics and culture are great drivers of conflict. And yeah, we cannot not consider these.
So that's where, and you said it a little bit earlier, and we've talked about this in past shows, that's where project managers need to go beyond process. They need to truly get themselves involved in emotional intelligence, in systems thinking that we talked about, in how to problem solve. These are attributes or characteristics beyond just the technical. And to be truly effective project manager, you really need to take into account those people factors or human factors.
There's a reason why 40% of the PMP exam focuses on just what you're talking now. And we're hitting that full in the face on almost every show. It's about people. The deliverable is about people, the work is about people, and anything that we need to change and monitor and understand is all about the people.
It is. And I've found, I don't know about your experience, but I have found that as I have addressed the people issues, well, I shouldn't say address the issues, set up the relationships so that we stave off the issues from ever happening, I've found much more harmony and much more congruency and much more collaboration in getting the project done just by addressing those people factors early.
It's just like quality. You plan it in, you build it in, and then with that mindset, you continue to learn and grow throughout the project, and it does make it easy. It's part of doing work correctly.
I think I have exhausted my brain today.
Yeah, I think we're good. Let's say goodbye, but let's also remind each other and remind our audience where we can be found. Where can we find you, Merv?
Definitely on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn and I'm on there every day these days, checking in on who's writing what about what aspect of project management. And Tim, you're going to love this. I just found a group on LinkedIn that deals with humor in project management. So I'm going to get involved with them, but LinkedIn is where you'll find me, and maybe even in that forum.
Oh, that's great. And myself as well. I got a couple major milestones in a project that I was working on out of the way. So I'll be addressing questions and comments, and I'll be accepting followers and all that throughout. But yeah, let's continue to reach out. And audience, if you're interested, tell us what you are interested in and what you like and what you'd like us to pursue. We have a schedule for the foreseeable future, but we're really happy to address what you think is important now.
We can pivot with the best of them, Tim.
Indeed.
We're project managers.
Thanks again, Merv, for a great conversation. Looking forward to next week, and we'll talk to you then.
Great. I'm now going to download this video, and I'm going to count my ums and ahs. We'll see you next week.
Have a great day.
Yeah.